This time on Poll Hub, we're looking at extreme weather and climate change in the wake of those deadly tornadoes in Kentucky. Do Americans link the two? Do scientists? We're looking at the data. Then we're also looking at the future of work. For gig workers in particular, the last decade, gig work has been a buzzword, if not necessarily a tidal shift in the way we work. But what happens after the pandemic? A new report has some fascinating insights. We're going to dig into that. And we end 2021 with a resolution. Let's make Lee's Fun Fact fun again. What do you say? Let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Marenkoff.
The news in the weather department in the last week has been just devastating. Those tornadoes, strange tornadoes in December that killed multiples of people in Kentucky. The number is still not fixed because they're still looking for people as we record this on December 16th. But it did get us to thinking about these extreme weather events that we've been seeing all over the country, the world, especially over the last year. There's been so many. And climate change. Scientists, for the most part, link the two, at least in some ways. But I was struck in particular by a couple of quotes from people in some news articles from some of the climate scientists that they couldn't necessarily link what happened in Kentucky to climate change. They couldn't say these things happened because of climate change, although there are linkages to the severity of hurricanes and some other things that can be directly linked. So we looked back at some of our data and some other data that is out there, and what did we find? What is it about this that surprised either of you?
I think regardless of whether you think the extreme weather events that we have seen around the country, and as you mentioned, around the world, Jay, whether you think it's related or caused by climate change, and certainly causation, as we know in statistics, is a much more difficult thing to prove than to just know that things may have a relationship between the two, and they may be occurring because things are occurring at the same time. But regardless, of all of that, almost 3 in 10 Americans in our poll in October with our partners NPR and the PBS NewsHour have been impacted by an extreme weather event in the last 2 years. And then although 8 in 10 Americans say they would never intentionally move to a place where they thought they would be impacted by an extreme weather event, two-thirds of Americans also say that if they did live in such a place, even if they had an extreme weather event, their instinct would be to rebuild and restart their lives, reset their lives in that same community and not move away. So I think it's something that many of us have all experienced, but it doesn't necessarily take away the feelings that we have about the places where we live and the people and the communities that make up those places.
Although those photographs from Kentucky, in that area where it hit the worst, unfortunately, it really doesn't resemble anything that those people would recognize. I was struck by, I don't know a whole lot about extreme weather events and tornadoes, but I was struck by the fact that they said this one stayed on the ground for like 200 miles or something, which, it's just, our image of a tornado is you see the twister, it comes down and then it moves on. But this was just a swath that was cut that was just devastating for the area. But I think, unfortunately, we're going to see more stuff like this, I think, in the coming years. I think there's a sense that the environment and the weather situation has become much more tenuous. And I know he's not held in high regard right now, but former Governor Andrew Cuomo used to have a good expression to characterize this. He'd say, something like, we have a once in a generation or once in a century event every 2 years. And so it seems like, you turn around and then you get something which doesn't fit the normal pattern. And then you say, are we really, is this now the new normal where we're getting all these kinds of things, and how devastating they are? And still there are extreme weather deniers, if we can use that phrase.
Well, yeah, I mean, so scientists do link to a large degree the increase in extreme weather events and the severity of them in general to climate change. At the same time we did our poll in early October, our friends at Monmouth were in the field with a poll that was released almost the same time, like a day apart. And they asked, we asked questions about extreme weather and how people felt about whether they would rebuild, things like that. They asked one question that did stand out to me when we were looking through this. Do you think that the world's climate is undergoing a change that is causing more extreme weather patterns and the rise of sea levels, or is this not happening? So, although they kind of shortened it to, do you believe in climate change or not? I think it's actually a slightly more specifically worded question. 76% of Americans believe that, and 18% of Americans do not believe that. But, as we have come to expect, there is a dramatic partisan divide. So, 48% of Republicans believe it's happening, 43% don't. And then independents and Democrats are, very strongly believe that indeed climate is undergoing a change that is leading to more extreme weather and to sea level change. So not a surprise in some ways, but it's hard. I guess what I struggle with is it's hard for me to understand how what happened in New York over the summer with the giant rainfalls, what's happened all over the country. I mean, we could spend the whole show listing them out just this year. But then what happens in Kentucky, and not to understand what nearly every climate scientist in the world says, which is they're linked. That seems like a disconnect to me.
Well, I think part of the issue here too is that not so much the disagreement. And I think the fact that 43% of Republicans, it certainly wasn't the plurality, but it's fairly divided even among Republicans, that there is in fact some kind of, extreme weather changes that.
Yeah, 48% of Republicans. Yeah, 48% say that it is happening.
Right, but the bigger divide is really about, well, what is causing it, and whether this is something that is just evolutionary in terms of the cycles that the planet goes through, or whether human beings have had a significant impact upon that. And that's where in the polling data you definitely see a much greater divide. Particularly among the parties, because of the fact it has policy implications. It has policy implications for the role of government, and it has policy implications for the responsibility of businesses. And so there's less disagreement, I think, about the fact that, we're all kind of seeing something is happening. And I think also that we seem to disagree just in terms of the language, and certain words, get, characterized as buzzwords, and immediately people start, heading to their partisan corners. Global warming being one, that then it moved to climate change. But I think, when you're talking, particularly like in coastal areas and red states, I'm thinking Florida in particular. Although there's a lot of disagreement about climate change, whether it exists or whether, what should be done about it, there is much more consensus on the idea that we need to be resilient about extreme weather. And we need to come together as communities with extreme weather. So, there's a lot of consensus that can move us in the right direction.
Yeah, but see, not to be Debbie Downer on all this, but I feel that, we're into, alternative facts a little bit. And whenever there's a proposal to do something, what I would call positive, scientifically based in a lot of these areas, or just economically or ethically based, it raises all kinds of, red flags about, this is going to hurt business. So when we're talking about, wearing masks in restaurants, this will hurt businesses.
Well, hold on, Lee, hold on. We're not going down that road.
We're in extreme weather.
Let me go out. Let me go extreme weather then. Okay. So I'm old enough to remember, as the phrase is used so often, when Los Angeles was smog heaven out there, where you couldn't even see some of our major cities for all the, air pollution. And you know what? We've gotten in front of those issues a little bit more. And, all the businesses didn't close down because there are now some, restrictions on fuel, for example, and how much can be put into the environment polluting. So, there has progress on these things. It's just very, very painful and slow. And the people who are most upset about the climate issues and extreme weather are the ones who are saying the clock is ticking. And so the question is, how much time do we have to get in front of this kind of issue?
Well, for good or bad, I think the polling also does show that as people do experience unusual weather patterns and extreme weather events, they are more likely to see climate change as a serious problem, as one poll has shown. That people who live in coastal states are certainly much more likely to want to be able to deal with climate change and see it as a serious problem than those who are inland. So perhaps as we do experience these things, we will find some consensus on how to deal with them. But on another topic, we are also in the midst still of a pandemic that has impacted a lot of what we do, not necessarily where we live, but certainly where we work. Employment is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, particularly in the last few years. Pre-pandemic, we were talking about something called gig work or contract work or side work. And we were seeing a real growth in that area of Americans who have tried to earn their livelihood by just having these kinds of short-term or less traditional versions of contract work. There's a new study out by the Pew Research that actually looks at the gig economy post-pandemic and has some interesting findings. What did you guys find most surprising about this new study?
Well, what really jumped out at me was the numbers. We have talked about the gig economy on this podcast and internally a lot about gig work, and a lot of people have, as I think I mentioned at the top. This isn't new. I mean, gig work's been around for a while. But one of the things in the Pew study that surprised me, because we all know Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and all. I mean, we all know about and see all these people who are doing gig work. And I was surprised that in this Pew study, which was just released in the last week or so, that only 16% of U.S. adults have said they're doing any gig platform work. Yeah, I mean, only 16%. If you extrapolate that out, that's tens of millions of people. So I get that. But I think I just was under the impression that more people were engaged in that than I thought. One of the other things that stands out there, though, in terms of just the numbers, is that it's 30% of people 18 to 29. That's a third of the workforce under the age of 30. And that, while the 16% maybe struck me as, well, that doesn't seem like so much, 30% seems like a lot to me. So
yes, and it really is. And as you look at the who these people are, I mean, that's Barb, to your original question. What jumped out, and Jay, to me, it was just the who is and who isn't. So it's more male, it's younger, it's whiter. It is definitely.
It's not whiter. It's actually Hispanics or. It's the whites are the least likely to be doing gig work.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I backed in on that. But the so it is a interesting demographic phenomena that this is happening, and I can only wonder what's going to be going on in the next 6 months, in the next year, to work. as we get back to whatever normal becomes, or whatever the new normal is.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the low number too in the Pew Research poll, the 16% of Americans have tried an online gig platform to earn some money. When we did a poll back in 2018, before work really blew up and we had to figure out how and where and what we could do to earn a living for many folks, we found that 20% of Americans define themselves as contract workers, which meant that they were hired to do a specific project for a fixed time or a fixed amount of money. But I wonder also how much these polls, and I know we've struggled with the question wording when we tried to talk about gig work to people. I just wonder how difficult it is to actually measure exactly what gig work is, because it means so much. It means something different to so many different people. So, for instance, many full-time workers, and we know full-time workers, people who work for pay, is around 60% of adults in this country, and 70% of those people work for one employer. So that means that there's a pretty large proportion of people who are just kind of doing these side jobs, and they may not call it contract work, they may not call it gig work, but it's kind of extra money. And so I wonder also, given the fact that work seems to be being redefined, how much of how many of us will actually be working only for one employer, in the coming years, or is that not going to be a realistic expectation?
Yeah, one of the things I wonder about in that, and in light of what's happened, the other big change in the workplace that's happened during the pandemic, which is this remote hybrid kind of thing, is gig work more appealing to either workers or employers? Now that I think the new reality is that the office is not going to be full for a long time to come, if ever. And I wonder if that makes it easier or more likely that people do some side hustles. Even if they've got a full-time job, they can do a side hustle, 10 hours a week or 8 hours a week that involves not having to show up someplace, not having to drive a Lyft, not having to do DoorDash or whatever and deliver groceries or restaurant stuff. That's one thing that I'm kind of looking out for. That's what I wonder about the future of that.
Yeah, and I should point out that I conflated a couple statistics before when I was going down the demography between the gig economy workers and the contract workers. And the gender on that was, I was talking more at that point about contract, not the gig, when I talked about male and female. Just want to correct myself along the way. But you mentioned, Barb, about, what's the nature of work going to be? So I've been, 46 years having only worked one place. So I'm going to become the dinosaur, I think, in all this.
Oh, you're already a dinosaur, Lee.
We're gonna get you a side gig, Lee. We did have you driving an Uber, but we named it something different, which we won't talk about here. But maybe we can get you, I don't know, maybe you could go to your neighbors and offer to deliver meals.
Well, there you go. But
isn't Meals on Wheels, like at some point, someday you retire and you do Meals on Wheels? That's a side hustle,
yes,
right?
yes. And Mary just pointed out the possibility of babysitting.
Gee, I wonder why she suggested that. Does she have a new child?
I don't know. It looks like a very self-advantaged.
Well, in our survey research course this semester, we did have a group of students who one of the groups had decided to do their poll on how work has potentially changed after the pandemic. And that was Jackie, Greta, and Amanda. And they wanted to focus on people who were working full-time in person before the pandemic, and to really get a sense of what has happened. And what we did see from their research, and this was a national survey, they researched and developed the questions to talk to Americans about this. And what they did find is that there has overall been a decline in in-person work. And more importantly, but I think goes to your point, Jay, in the future of work, is that there's a real interest now in American workers to have more flexibility in their workplace. Most people, the majority of workers, do want to have some kind of flexibility, either from working at home remotely or to at least have some kind of a hybrid of some at home, some in the office. But whatever the results of the pandemic, it was certainly the fact that people have thought about work very differently.
And they may even resolve to do that in the coming year, which is the segue into my fun fact. That's what I need, Jay. I need some kind of trumpets blaring in the front. Maybe we can produce some kind of little.
Maybe Marcello can edit something in.
Da, 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 da. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, it's fun fact time, ladies and gentlemen. 1939. Are you going to make a New Year's resolution? Gallup asked people. 17% said yes, 83% said no. However, by 2020,
wow.
Am I reading that wrong? No. Yeah, I'm right.
Yeah, you got it right.
Yeah, you got that.
Yeah, I'm reading that right.
And in 2020,
CBS will make a New Year's resolution. 43% won't, 53%. Much more popular by 2020 than it was way back when. I haven't a clue why. Maybe somebody has that insight, but I'm curious as to whether our team are New Year's resolution makers.
Well, I started only when we started the podcast. In the first year of the podcast, we did this because we've asked this question in the past in our polls. And so, yeah, Lee and I both made the same resolution that year, which was something about either exercising more or losing weight or something like that. I don't remember. That clearly worked. I never really did before. I'm not a resolution maker, but if I have to for the show, I will give.
Well, I don't actually think of it as a resolution, which seems kind of weird, but I know that I do come to the end of the year thinking about how things may change and how, there are things that I might want to do differently in the coming year. So I guess that counts as resolutions. Maybe I don't like the word resolutions because I have to stay committed to it. And that's not necessarily something I'm good at, but it certainly, for me, is a time of reflection of the year past and thoughts about things I might be able to accomplish or goals that I'd like to achieve in the coming year.
So, Lee, are you going to have a resolution this year?
I am not, Jay. I failed so many times. I'll go to a.
Well, if you look at the crosstabs, older people aren't really good at this.
Yeah, that's right.
We're less likely to make resolutions and far less likely to keep them.
Yeah, and that's my category, the older people, right? That's what you said. Yeah, I'm thinking.
Well, we divided at 45.
Okay.
So what would be your resolution then, Lee?
If I had to resolve, I would say I will resolve to attend the Giants Super Bowl rally in New York, and then the World Series for the Yankees. I got nothing. I do like to point out that my father was born on December 31st, and he would have been 107. So when I was growing up, New Year's Eve was a birthday party. So that was kind of a different thing.
Well, happy birthday to your dad then, and that we will resolve to think of your dad on New Year's Eve. How about that?
There you go.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor. Poll Hub team includes Ashley Marcinek and Marcello Bettman.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other like-minded listeners find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy. It's our free online learning portal. If you've got questions, tweet them to us at Marist Poll.
Finally, however, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released. We'll see you next time.